You've spent so long telling yourself you're perfectly fine alone that it almost became part of your identity. No distractions, no chasing, no desperate messages at midnight, no pretending someone's mixed signals are a love story. Just you, your standards, and enough silence to make people wonder what you're actually waiting for. And now something is changing. Not because some magical person has been assigned to appear at your doorstep, but because you've changed the way you see yourself and the kind of connection you're willing to accept. That's the part nobody prepares you for. When you stop begging for attention, you become far more selective about who gets access to your life. You stop confusing chemistry with compatibility. You stop calling loneliness love just because somebody finally replied. And suddenly the idea of a genuine relationship doesn't feel like losing your independence. It feels like meeting someone who can stand beside the person you've already worked so hard to become. Maybe your first true love isn't about some perfect fantasy arriving at exactly the right moment. Maybe it's about being ready enough to recognize something real when it appears, instead of destroying it with fear, desperation, or old patterns, while the version of you that once believed love had to be chased slowly disappears, and something calmer, sharper, and far more selective begins taking its place, leaving you to wonder what happens when the person you've been waiting for finally meets the person you've spent all this time becoming. Stop chasing love and start becoming ready for it. Because there's a difference between wanting someone and actually being prepared to share your life with someone. A lot of people say they want a relationship, but what they really want is relief from loneliness, validation from another person, or someone who can temporarily distract them from the parts of themselves they haven't dealt with yet. That's not love. That's emotional outsourcing with a romantic soundtrack. And eventually the music stops. If you spend your life chasing attention, you'll start mistaking availability for compatibility. Someone texts you every night, and suddenly they're the one. Someone gives you compliments, and suddenly you ignore every warning sign because your ego is finally getting fed. Beautiful little trap. The problem isn't wanting love. The problem is becoming so hungry for it that you'll accept almost anything wearing the costume. Real readiness looks different. It means you can enjoy your own company without desperately needing another person to prove that you're valuable. It means you can walk away from someone who treats you poorly, even when you're attracted to them. It means you can say no to temporary excitement when it threatens the peace you've worked hard to build. You don't become cold. You become selective. And selective people don't chase every opportunity just because it knocks. They look through the window first. They ask questions. They pay attention to patterns. They notice whether someone's words match their behavior. They don't confuse a powerful beginning with a healthy future. That's the part nobody wants to hear when they're lonely. Your first responsibility isn't finding someone who loves you. It's becoming someone who knows what healthy love actually looks like. Because if you don't know your own standards, someone else will eventually write them for you. You'll accept inconsistent communication because you don't want to seem demanding. You'll tolerate disrespect because you're afraid of starting over. You'll call emotional chaos passion because peace feels unfamiliar. And then you'll wonder why love keeps hurting you. Maybe the problem isn't that love is cruel. Maybe you're repeatedly choosing situations that cannot give you what you're asking for. So stop auditioning for people who aren't even offering you a role in their future. Stop sending paragraphs to someone who responds with 3 words. Stop turning mixed signals into mysterious evidence that they're secretly afraid of their feelings. Sometimes a mixed signal is simply a mixed signal. Sometimes someone isn't confused. They just aren't interested enough. Brutal, maybe. Useful, absolutely. Your dignity becomes stronger when you stop negotiating with reality. If someone wants to be in your life, their actions should eventually make that clear. You shouldn't need a detective, a psychic, and 3 friends to interpret a text message. And when genuine love does appear, you don't want to meet it as a desperate version of yourself. You want to meet it as someone who can communicate, listen, set boundaries, apologize, forgive, and remain emotionally grounded when things aren't perfect. You want to be capable of loving someone without abandoning yourself. That's the difference between attachment and partnership. You're not waiting for another person to complete you. You're becoming whole enough to choose someone because they genuinely fit into the life you're building, not because you're terrified of being alone, while the silence that once felt like punishment becomes preparation. The solitude that once made you impatient becomes strength, and the standards you once thought were keeping love away become the very things protecting you from wasting your heart on people who only wanted access to it without the responsibility of caring for it, leaving you less interested in chasing anyone and far more interested in recognizing the person who arrives with consistency, honesty, respect, and the kind of presence that doesn't require you to beg for proof that they actually want to be there, while you continue becoming the kind of person who can receive real love without turning it into a rescue mission, a fantasy, or another excuse to forget who you are when nobody is watching. Chemistry can make you feel like you've discovered something extraordinary, but compatibility is what determines whether that feeling can survive reality, and that's where people get themselves into trouble, because attraction is loud while compatibility is usually quiet. Chemistry arrives like fireworks. Suddenly your heart is racing, you're checking your phone every 30 seconds, every sentence feels meaningful, and you're convinced the universe has finally decided to entertain you. Wonderful. But fireworks don't build houses. They're beautiful for a moment, and then they're gone, leaving you standing in the dark wondering what just happened. Real connection requires more than excitement. It requires values that don't constantly collide, communication that doesn't feel like a battlefield, respect that doesn't disappear when emotions rise, and consistency that doesn't depend on whether someone is having a good day. You can have unbelievable chemistry with someone who is completely wrong for your life. That's the uncomfortable truth. You can laugh together, have incredible conversations, feel intense attraction, and still discover that your expectations about loyalty, commitment, money, family boundaries, or the future are completely incompatible, and no amount of butterflies can negotiate those differences forever. Attraction might get you through the door, but compatibility determines whether you can actually live in the house. That's why you need to stop judging relationships only by how intensely someone makes you feel. Ask how they make you behave. Do you become calmer, more honest, and more yourself around them? Or do you become anxious, suspicious, desperate, and constantly afraid they're going to disappear? Do their actions match their promises? Can you disagree without destroying each other? Can you communicate without turning every conversation into a test? Can they respect your boundaries even when they don't like them? Can you respect theirs? Those questions aren't nearly as exciting as, do they make my heart race? But they're much more useful, because a person can give you butterflies and still give you headaches for the next 5 years. Beautiful combination, isn't it? That's why you need to watch patterns instead of isolated moments. Anyone can be charming for a weekend. Anyone can send perfect messages during the beginning. Anyone can promise everything when emotions are high. But consistency reveals character. Watch how someone behaves when they're frustrated. Watch how they treat people who cannot benefit them. Watch how they handle disappointment. Watch whether they take responsibility when they're wrong or immediately search for someone else to blame. Watch whether their affection remains steady when the excitement becomes ordinary. That's where compatibility begins revealing itself. And don't expect perfection. You won't find a flawless person because you aren't one either. The goal isn't to find someone who never makes mistakes. The goal is to find someone whose values allow both of you to repair mistakes without turning every problem into emotional warfare. Healthy love isn't boring simply because it isn't chaotic. Sometimes peace feels strange when you've become accustomed to confusion. You might mistake stability for a lack of passion because your nervous system learned to associate uncertainty with excitement. That's why self-awareness matters. You need to know what you're actually attracted to and whether that attraction is leading you towards something healthy or simply repeating something familiar. Real compatibility isn't about finding someone identical to you. Differences can be interesting. It's about whether your differences can coexist with mutual respect, whether your priorities can work together, whether your communication styles can meet somewhere in the middle, and whether both people are willing to grow instead of demanding that the other person remain exactly the same forever. Because the person who truly belongs in your life won't simply create intense feelings and dramatic moments. They'll also create enough trust, stability, respect, honesty, and emotional safety for the relationship to survive after the fireworks disappear, when ordinary mornings replace exciting beginnings, when problems need solving instead of romanticizing, and when both of you have to decide whether the connection is strong enough to become something real, rather than remaining another beautiful story that only worked while everything was new, leaving you to understand that chemistry may start the conversation, but compatibility is what determines whether you can keep having it without losing yourself in the process, while you learn to choose not only the person who makes your heart beat faster, but the person whose character gives your heart a reason to feel safe when the excitement settles into everyday life. Protect your standards without closing your heart, because there's a difference between being selective and being emotionally unavailable, and people love confusing the two. They think if you have standards, you're difficult. If you don't respond to every person, you're arrogant. If you walk away from disrespect, you're too sensitive. Apparently having self-respect has become a personality defect. How convenient. But standards aren't walls. They're filters. They help you decide what belongs in your life and what doesn't. You can remain open to love while refusing to accept dishonesty, manipulation, disrespect, inconsistency, or emotional games. You don't have to become bitter just because you've been disappointed. You don't have to punish the next person for what someone else did. That's not healing. That's simply transferring old damage into a new relationship and hoping the new person somehow survives it. Your standards should protect your peace, not imprison your heart. That means knowing what you value before someone attractive walks into your life and makes you forget every principle you claimed was important. Because attraction can make people negotiate with themselves. Suddenly the boundary that seemed so important yesterday becomes, maybe this one time. The behavior you promised yourself you'd never tolerate becomes, they're just going through something. The inconsistency becomes, they're probably busy. And before you know it, you're writing a full legal defense for someone who hasn't even demonstrated that they deserve access to you. Stop doing that. Pay attention to behavior. Someone can say all the right things and still show you through their actions that they're not ready for a healthy relationship. Believe the pattern. You don't need to hate them. You don't need revenge. You don't need a dramatic speech. You can simply recognize that they're not compatible with what you're building and step away. That's maturity. And keeping your heart open means you're still willing to meet people without assuming everyone is dangerous. You're still willing to trust gradually. You're willing to communicate honestly. You're willing to give someone a fair chance without giving them unlimited chances to disrespect you. That's an important distinction. Trust should be built, not blindly handed over. You don't have to reveal your entire emotional history on the first conversation. You don't have to make someone your entire world because they made you laugh for 3 hours. Let time reveal character. Let consistency create trust. Let actions confirm words. That's how you stay open without becoming careless. And don't confuse standards with a fantasy checklist. You might create an impossible image of the perfect person, and then reject everyone who doesn't match it, while ignoring the fact that you're also a complicated human being with flaws, fears, habits, and unfinished growth. Standards should identify essential values, not demand perfection. Look for honesty. Look for respect. Look for emotional responsibility. Look for willingness to communicate and grow. Look for someone whose presence doesn't require you to constantly abandon your own needs, and offer the same qualities in return. You can't demand emotional maturity from someone while refusing to practice it yourself. You can't ask for honesty while hiding your own intentions. You can't demand respect while using manipulation when you're angry. Relationships become healthier when standards become mutual responsibilities rather than weapons used to judge another person. So keep your heart open, but keep your eyes open too. Love doesn't require blindness. You can be hopeful and observant at the same time. You can believe something beautiful is possible while still paying attention to reality. You can give affection without giving away your identity. You can care deeply without becoming dependent, and you can walk away without turning the other person into a villain, because sometimes two decent people simply aren't right for each other, and forcing the connection won't magically create compatibility. While the strongest version of love isn't built by lowering every standard just to keep someone around, but by finding a connection where your standards, boundaries, values, and humanity can exist without constant negotiation, allowing your heart to remain warm without becoming careless, allowing your mind to remain alert without becoming cynical, and allowing yourself to believe in love without abandoning the self. Respect that makes healthy love possible, because the goal isn't to build a fortress around your heart where nobody can enter. The goal is to build a door with a lock you control, opening it slowly for people who demonstrate through their actions that they understand the value of what you're trusting them with, while refusing to confuse loneliness with a reason to hand the keys to anyone who happens to knock at the right moment, and continuing to believe that the right connection doesn't require you to become smaller, weaker, quieter, or less honest just to keep it alive, but gives both people enough room to remain themselves, while choosing each other with clarity, respect, and intention. Even when the excitement fades and real life begins to test whether the connection was built on attraction alone or on something strong enough to actually carry two imperfect people forward together. Don't let your past experiences control your future, because that's how old pain quietly becomes the architect of your next relationship. You get hurt once, maybe twice, and suddenly your brain decides it has discovered the universal law of love, trust nobody, expect disappointment, keep everyone at a safe distance. Very efficient, very protective, and completely exhausting. The problem is that your past can teach you something without being allowed to dictate everything that comes next. Someone betrayed your trust, but that doesn't mean everyone will. Someone disappeared without explanation, but that doesn't mean every future connection is secretly preparing to do the same. Someone made you feel unworthy, but their behavior was never an objective measurement of your value. Yet people carry these experiences forward like invisible luggage, dragging old arguments into new conversations, comparing new people to old ones, searching for warning signs that may not even exist, and then wondering why genuine connection feels impossible. You have to learn the difference between wisdom and fear. Wisdom says, I learned from what happened, so I'll pay attention. Fear says, it happened before, so it must happen again. Wisdom observes patterns. Fear predicts disasters. Wisdom creates boundaries. Fear builds walls. Wisdom moves carefully. Fear refuses to move at all. You don't need to forget what happened. You don't need to pretend it didn't hurt. You don't need to become friends with someone who treated you badly, or convince yourself that everything was somehow your fault. You simply need to stop giving yesterday unlimited authority over tomorrow. That's where healing becomes powerful. You take the lesson without carrying the entire wound into every new interaction. If someone broke your trust, learn what you ignored. If you accepted behavior you shouldn't have accepted, understand why. If you abandoned your own boundaries because you were afraid of losing someone, recognize that pattern. Not to punish yourself, but to make different choices next time, because healing isn't becoming someone who never gets hurt again. That's impossible. Healing is becoming someone who can respond differently when life hurts. You become more aware, more honest, more selective. You stop romanticizing inconsistency. You stop trying to rescue people who refuse to change. You stop confusing emotional intensity with emotional safety. And you stop believing that suffering is proof of love. Sometimes the healthiest relationship you'll ever experience will feel strange simply because it doesn't constantly activate your anxiety. No disappearing acts, no manipulation, no guessing games, no dramatic arguments followed by dramatic apologies. Just two people communicating like adults, which somehow sounds revolutionary these days. Give yourself permission to experience that kind of peace without immediately assuming something must be wrong. Your nervous system may have become familiar with chaos, but familiar doesn't mean healthy. You can learn a new normal. You can become comfortable with consistency. You can allow someone to show you who they are without interrogating every sentence for hidden betrayal. At the same time, don't become so determined to prove that you've healed that you ignore genuine warning signs. Healing doesn't mean becoming naive. It means becoming balanced. You can trust while verifying. You can love while maintaining boundaries. You can forgive without reopening a door that should remain closed. You can give someone a chance without giving them unlimited access to your life. And if a relationship ends, you don't have to turn the ending into evidence that you're doomed. Sometimes endings are simply information. They reveal incompatibility, timing, immaturity, or lessons you couldn't see while you were emotionally attached. Take what is useful and leave what isn't. Don't carry someone's rejection like a permanent identity. Don't turn one person's inability to love you properly into a prophecy about your entire future. The person who hurt you doesn't get to choose who you become afterward. That's your decision. You can become bitter, suspicious, and closed off, or you can become wiser, calmer, and more intentional. You can protect your heart without burying it. You can remember the past without living inside it. And when someone genuine eventually enters your life, they shouldn't have to spend the entire relationship paying for crimes they didn't commit, because love cannot grow when one person is constantly standing trial for someone else's mistakes. While you keep comparing every new conversation to an old betrayal, every delayed message to an old disappearance, every disagreement to an old argument, until the present person becomes invisible beneath the shadow of someone who isn't even there, leaving you trapped in a relationship with the past, instead of actually experiencing the person standing in front of you. And the real freedom comes when you can finally say that what happened mattered. It changed you, it taught you, but it doesn't own you anymore, allowing you to enter something new with your eyes open, your standards intact, your boundaries strong, and your heart no longer controlled by memories that were never supposed to become instructions for the rest of your life. While every new experience gives you another opportunity to choose differently, communicate better, recognize healthier patterns, and discover that moving forward doesn't require pretending the past never happened. It simply requires refusing to let the past make every decision for you, especially when something genuine finally begins to appear and you are tempted to destroy it before it has the chance to show you what it could become. Because sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't trusting another person immediately. It's trusting yourself enough to recognize what is healthy, respond when something isn't, and remain open to something real without allowing old wounds to hold the steering wheel forever. While you continue learning how to love without fear, how to protect yourself without isolation, and how to walk into the future without dragging every ghost from the past behind you. Become the person you want to meet, because waiting for some perfect person to arrive while you remain exactly where you are is a strange little bargain. You want someone confident, emotionally mature, loyal, interesting, disciplined, honest, and capable of communicating like an adult. But then you look at your own life and discover you're still trying to become those things yourself. Well, that's awkward. The truth is, healthy relationships aren't built by finding a flawless person who magically fixes everything. They're built by two imperfect people who have taken enough responsibility for themselves that they can actually contribute something healthy to each other's lives. So if you want someone who communicates honestly, practice honest communication. If you want someone who respects boundaries, learn to respect boundaries. If you want someone who keeps promises, become someone who keeps promises. If you want emotional stability, stop expecting another person to regulate every emotion you experience. That's not love. That's outsourcing your nervous system. A relationship should add connection to your life, not become the entire foundation holding you upright. You should be able to stand alone before you ask someone to stand beside you. That doesn't mean you have to be perfectly healed, perfectly successful, or completely fearless. Nobody gets that membership card. It means you're willing to take responsibility for your growth instead of expecting another person to do it for you. Work on your habits. Learn how to communicate when you're frustrated instead of disappearing or exploding. Learn how to apologize without turning the apology into a defense speech. Learn how to listen without preparing your counter-argument while the other person is still talking. Learn how to disagree without making every disagreement a threat to the relationship. Learn how to say, "I was wrong," without feeling like your entire identity has collapsed. Those skills aren't romantic at first glance, but they become incredibly attractive when real life arrives. Because eventually every relationship leaves the honeymoon stage. The messages become ordinary. The dates become routines. Bills appear. Stress appears. Bad moods appear. Misunderstandings appear. And that's when character becomes more important than chemistry. You don't want to meet someone only when everything feels exciting. You want to be capable of loving them when life becomes inconvenient too. And you should expect the same from them. That's why becoming the person you want to meet isn't about creating a fake version of yourself designed to attract someone. It's about becoming more authentic, responsible, and self-aware. Don't pretend you're confident if you're terrified. Learn why you're terrified. Don't pretend you don't need anyone if you secretly crave connection. Admit that you want love while still respecting your independence. Don't pretend you're above relationships because you've been hurt. Heal enough to understand what happened and what you can do differently, and don't wait until someone arrives before you start building a life worth sharing. Create that life now. Have goals. Develop interests. Take care of yourself. Build meaningful friendships. Learn to enjoy quiet evenings without treating them like evidence that something is wrong with you. Become comfortable being alone so that when someone arrives, you choose them because you genuinely want them, not because you're desperate to escape yourself. That's a completely different foundation. And when love finally appears, you won't have to abandon your identity to keep it. You'll know how to make room for another person without destroying the space you've created for yourself. You'll know that love can be deep without being consuming, passionate without being chaotic, supportive without becoming dependent. You'll recognize that the right person isn't necessarily the one who makes you forget your problems, but the one who can stand beside you while both of you continue solving your own problems, growing separately and together, without turning the relationship into a rescue operation, while you keep becoming more honest with yourself about what you want, what you offer, what you need to improve, and what you will no longer accept, until the person you hope to meet begins to look less like some imaginary perfect stranger and more like someone who could genuinely fit into the life you've already started building. Not because fate finally delivered a miracle, but because you became prepared to recognize a healthy connection when it appeared, prepared to contribute instead of simply consume, prepared to communicate instead of manipulate, prepared to love without losing yourself, and prepared to walk away from what is unhealthy without believing that leaving means you have failed, because the ultimate goal isn't simply finding your first true love. It's becoming someone capable of experiencing real love without turning it into a fantasy, a dependency, or another battlefield, while the person you eventually choose is doing the same work on their side, bringing their own character, standards, imperfections, lessons, and willingness to grow into the relationship, creating something that doesn't require either person to become less of themselves just to keep the connection alive, and allowing love to become not the thing that completes two broken halves, but the choice two whole human beings make when they recognize that their separate lives can become richer, healthier, and more meaningful when they decide to walk forward together without asking either person to disappear along the way.